Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adopted mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Well, hello, Called to Love family, and welcome back to another episode of the Called to Love podcast, where my goal and my heart and the reason for having this show all together is just to serve and equip and encourage your family to respond to and continue to walk out well your own call to love the children that the Lord has placed in your heart and in your homes. I'm so grateful for the time that I get to spend with you each and every week, and I am excited as we get started today to talk about a topic that honestly I needed some education on earlier this year and dove into it because I was invited to come and speak at another friend's podcast, my dear friend Cynthia Yanoff. She was curious about what it means and how to parent a neurodivergent child. And I had a really good time just diving into all of that information. And I thought this would be a really great time to share with you guys and kind of build a little bit off of last week's episode. We were talking about anxiety around the holidays. This information is something that you can carry all throughout the year, but you can also apply as you are going into the holiday break here in December. I'm excited. I'm wearing my beanie today because Arkansas is actually starting to act like it's December and winter outside. So I'm all for things cozy. And so I'm embracing that with you today for those of you who are joining me via video. And as we get started, before we dive into the topic, I want to make sure and remind you that I would love to hear from any one of you who would like to speak into a new series that I am planning to launch in early 2025, and that is the lies that Christian foster and adoptive parents believe. Now, we're diving into the biblical aspects of the lies that the enemy speaks to us, who tries to discourage. The enemy's goal is destruction. It is disruption. It is one that is a real challenge. Warfare is very, very real when it comes to stepping into this space of adoption and foster care. And I want to encourage and equip you in this way, biblically and spiritually, as well as the clinical and the practical that we dive into in this show. So if you have some input, some of your own previous experience, maybe a lie that you've overcome, or maybe a lie that you're currently struggling with, that the enemy is just hammering you with related to foster care and adoption in your own journey with that. If you would be willing to share that with me, I would be so honored to speak into that and dive into that with you together. You can contact me as usual with the links in the show notes at the end of today's episode. Head over there, send me a direct message through Instagram or at the email address that is in the clickable links. And I would love to hear from you and serve you in that way. Okay, let's dive into how do I parent and understand a neurodivergent child? What does that even mean? Well, I feel like neurodivergent is a pretty new term. Maybe I'm just late to the party. That happens a lot. I'm late to the party a lot on things. And so maybe I've just missed it, but it seems like a newer word that has come up in our culture, in our society, in the realm of the medical world, diagnosing different things. And so I thought it was really important because I think a lot of our kids probably do fall into this category as a result of their stories and their experiences, both emotionally and physiologically, and things that they have been exposed to in their young lives. We'll dive into that a little bit more. Before we get started, though, I really want to set the stage and lay a disclaimer for you when it comes to this idea of neurodivergent. What I don't want to encourage is labels. I believe wholeheartedly, and Scripture affirms this, that every human being is intricately and purposely created by God with a purpose and for a purpose. And so while it might help us to better understand our children, the way that their brains and their bodies work and how brain chemistry affects behavior and their interaction with the world, I want to caution lovingly that we don't just slap a label on a child and use that as an excuse to be less tolerant, less understanding of a child's struggle and their own experience in the world. child, especially as we're loving kids from hard places. And so, little disclaimer there as we get started and we talk about that. We're not labeling, we are explaining and just diving a little bit further. I don't know about you, but the more I understand, the better I can empathize and the more grace I have for my child who maybe operates and functions just in a different way than maybe I expect or understand. So that is my goal and my heart behind talking about what it means to be neurodivergent. So, have you heard this term before? Is it new to you? It was to me. Really, what it means when you break it down and you look at a basic explanation or definition of the word neurodivergent, it means a brain that processes information differently. And, we talked about this a little bit in last week's episode when we were talking about the amygdala. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. We don't think about this very often. It's not something that's just always conscious on our brains, but whether we are conscious or unconscious, our brain is always working to scan our environment and interpret information around us. And we learn and interpret information through the five senses, right? We learn all of that in preschool, kindergarten, and that is sight, smell, sound, touch, and taste. And all of these senses are controlled by the brain. And for someone who is neurodivergent, the way that these senses send information to the brain can be different and it can require a building of skills to interpret and really understand their experience. So let's revisit just a quick breakdown of the brain in with the brain and the way that the Lord has designed our brain to affect our bodies and control every function in our bodies. The brain's first order of business is to self-preserve, right? We talked about the amygdala last week, and the limbic system is a part of that. It determines the body is safe at all times. And the role of this system and this part of the brain, actually, it plays a huge part in behavior, in emotional control, and our ability to learn. If the brain doesn't feel safe, it's going to shut down and go into survival mode, and you cannot learn. Their input is invalid at that point, if you will. So, first order of business is to self-preserve. The next order of business of the brain is to get our body's needs met. And so this is basic survival, basic needs, food, water, and rest. And all of this is controlled by the part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Now, if all of those needs are met, the brain feels safe and our bodily needs are met and we're functioning well, the brain will seek out connection with others. And it's just a beautiful way that, again, we see God's perfect design and the way that He designed human beings. He designed us, and we see that all the way back in Genesis 2 for relationship. Right? He said it's not good for man to be alone. So he designed and created a helpmate. And from there came a family. From there is extended families, which built communities, which established the church. And we see this beautiful extension of this need for and blessing of relationship. Now, when there is disruption to the brain for various reasons, this is where we can see a breakdown in relationships because of challenging or different behaviors, especially related to our kids that we are raising and when they are diagnosed or experiencing certain conditions. So, this could be anywhere from our kids who have experienced trauma, whether that's abuse, neglect. It can even mean a difficult birth experience, even with your biological children, or even acute medical care after birth, right? We think about our kids who have to experience NICU care and they're isolated from the typical human touch that we are designed to experience when we are first born. This can also mean kids who have had exposure to substances such as drugs or alcohol in utero. Any type of abuse that was incurred by the mother as she was carrying the child can affect development and the brain being able to function in a way that we would deem normal. Lastly, this would also include kids with just chromosomal abnormalities, developmental delayed cognition for various reasons. That kind of encompasses maybe just the difficult or different behaviors that we might see that might fall into this neurodivergent category. So, as I was researching all of this, I just honestly, I feel like the Lord just kind of gave it to me and break it down. I love points. I love, A through E. I love 1 through 5. And so that's what I'm going to bring you today as we talk about ways to effectively parent and understand our neurodivergent kiddos if you have a child who falls into this category. Number one, is to establish healthy expectations. And we talked about that again a little bit in last week's episode, where we really have to self examine before we lean into blaming our children for their behavior, and understand where we're coming from as parents and how that factors into our interpretation of their behavior and their experience of the world around them. So, again, just a little bit of a mindset reset as we talk about this for you yourself as the parent. I mean, I can imagine, and we talked about this in last week's episode. If you were listening, if you haven't, I encourage you to go back as we were diving into specifically anxiety. But we're in the holiday season. It is crazy. I mean, the month of December, goodness gracious, we're just now beginning it and I'm already tired. So I can imagine that. I think there's probably a few of you who would agree with that as you're listening today. And maybe you're anticipating all of the things that are going to be going on over the month of December, and the behaviors that might come as a result of disrupted schedules, disrupted routines. And there can be a lot of anxiety that's built up with all of that, especially if you are new to this experience of parenting a child who is considered neurodivergent, who just translates the world around them differently. Maybe you yourself are learning, and there's a lot of stress that comes with that. So here's where I want to pause and remind you as you're thinking about expectations. Number one, first and foremost, God has chosen you as the parent of your child. And this means you can do this. We all have a unique calling, and no child placed within a home and a family is an accident. The Lord is sovereign over every child and every home, and the conditions and the circumstances around that decision. And so I actually was at one of my favorite grocery stores. It's a local health food store that I like to go to, and it's a pretty calm environment for me. It's a smaller store. I have just a few set items that I typically, creature of habit here, always get there. And I was there recently and I was walking through the store and I just heard some sounds that were just a little bit different. You know, it's not typical grocery store etiquette to make these types of sounds. And it kind of just piqued my curiosity a little bit because it was different. And I happened to notice about that time, as I was hearing a sound come kind of closer and closer to me, there was a young man who he was probably early teens, middle school age, something along those lines. And there was a very clear medical diagnosis associated with his development, some form of special need. But he was there at the grocery store with his mama, and he was just making all kinds of joyful noises and interactions. And at that moment, the Lord just really got my attention, and my heart just not felt for that mom as from a stance of pity, but I was like, that's beautiful. That is the child that God has given her. And though I am sure she has experienced hard days and will experience hard days, how beautiful is it that I can see him clearly equipping that mom to love and parent that child, and the way she was interacting with him and allowing him to participate in the grocery shopping experience and the excitement that was coming out of that. Guys, that's beautiful. And that's neurodivergent. It's a different experience than what is considered developmentally normal and what we would just consider normal, but it is no less valuable and no less beautiful. And the Lord just used that really brief encounter to remind me of that very thing. We've got to release the expectations of culture and how they define normalcy, and even what those close to us expect as normal. And that's a really tough one when you have families that are like, why can't this child do this like everybody else? There's a lot of grace and a lot of ministry that can be done through the way that we respond to those things. And I know we've talked about that in previous episodes as well, but you can tell I have a really big, passionate soapbox about that, because every life is to be valued. A brain that works differently has so much to contribute to this world. You think about all the examples of those whose brains work differently, whether it's artists or musicians, inventors, or intellectuals. Why would we want to put those people and in a box? And to that extent, why would we want to put our kids in a box? And that label, kind of what I was talking about as we were getting started in today's conversation. So, as parents, we really have to resist this mindset that our kids are little extensions of us that prove our success. Ouch, that's a tough one I have struggled with many years, and one that I have really come to understand was a result of my own expectations and my own need for others to see me as a success because of the way that my children were presenting to the world. Does that make sense? Our kids are not problems to be solved. And there are not many versions of ourselves that we have to perfect. Our kids are unique individuals created by God for a purpose and with a purpose. And it is not our job as parents to create this idea of who our kids are. It is our job to embrace who God made our kids to be. It's also not our job to create a struggle free existence for our kids. And while being a neurodivergent child and experiencing the world differently can present different challenges, taking away that neurodivergent diagnosis is not going to remove struggles from our children's lives. So we really have to make sure in our expectations that we're not wishing away something that would make things better for them or a more perfect world for our kids. So we need to find a balance between, for lack of a better phrase, keeping the main thing, which is pointing our kids to Christ, loving them well, embracing them for who they are, thanking the Lord for the blessing that they are, and understanding their unique needs and parenting in that way that they need. I've talked about this so many times, but we've been given our children to steward them according to scripture for the purpose of A, pointing them to Christ, as I said, and their need for Him, and then B, just helping them to thrive and learn about the world around them. I love that. Second, for our kids, our diagnosis really doesn't define who they are. And we have to remember that. It is a part of them, but it is not who they are. I mean, I think about all of our kiddos who maybe have an ADHD diagnosis. If I were to meet, one of you today and you say to me, okay, this is so and so and they have ADHD, is that gonna tell me who that child is? Am I gonna be like, oh, because you said ADHD, I know exactly who that person is in and out? No, that's a part of who they are. It's a part of their experience. It's a part of how their brain works, but it's not who they are. And we have to get to the heart of who our children are and who God made them to be. So stop putting pressure on ourselves to force our kids to fit into this certain mold or expectation. Psalm 139 is so clear that the Lord knit each of us together in our mother's womb. He already determined that mold. God knew ahead of time who each of us were going to be and how our brains were going to interpret the world around us. And society has no say in that and in the mold that we fit our kids into. And so the scripture reminds us of His precision, His intentionality, and His effort, which equates to tremendous value of every life. So, with that, what do we expect from our kids? And that may be a question for you to ponder and pray through. If this may be a struggle for you in your own experience, or maybe you're kind of having an aha moment like I did when I started diving into this information, I was like, okay, I really need to reflect and measure my own expectations against the way that I embrace and parent each of my children, not just my adopted child. So, on the flip side of this, what I don't want you to hear also is that I'm suggesting that you should just let your child run crazy and amok because of a certain diagnosis that is attached to them. I think I've shared this with you guys before, but I'll say it again. I run a tight ship. I'm a type A. Um, if you do the Enneagram, I think I'm a 1. So that's like I run a tight ship. So, um, but with that, understanding that our kids need the security of our confident authority as their parents while we're also embracing who they are. There's a balance to be found there as we are teaching our kids biblical character that I think is right and good to do regardless of where our children find themselves in the spectrum of how the brain functions, and holding our kids capable of things that they are perfectly able to learn and do to equip them to thrive in this world and whatever that looks like for your child. Expectations that godly parents should require based on scripture is respect, to honor our mother and our father, obedience. Scripture clearly says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Learning personal responsibilities, to see others beyond themselves and to see their need for Christ. That's what the expectations we should have as parents who are believers and followers of Christ. And we balance those expectations while also meeting the unique needs based on how we come to understand how our children's brains interpret the world around them. So, number one, establishing healthy expectations. Number two, Become a student of your child. This is a classic TBRI practice and principle, and I would love to dive more into TBRI next year with you guys. It has been a game changer for me, just as I have come to learn more in my adoptive parent journey. But a big one of these is being curious. So, asking questions, becoming a student of your child. What does that mean? Leaning in and really seeking to understand what makes them tick, what brings them joy, what frustrates them. Be curious, ask questions instead of just, this is the law, obey it or else. Lean into why they interpret the way that they do. Ask questions about what they're sensing, what they're seeing, what they're tasting, what they're feeling, all of those things. Because as we remember, and I said this last week as well, behavior is a communication of a need. And sometimes behavior is very unlovable. I mean, truth. We have to be honest about that. Their behavior can be very, very unlovable and very challenging. But we miss an opportunity to meet needs when we don't take the time to ask why behind the behavior that we're experiencing. And so, for example, anger or lashing out is often a masked fear due to a feeling of either feeling unsafe or overstimulated. So if we lean into what maybe is making them feel unsafe or overstimulated, there's less of a threat and a feeling of rejection and disobedience from our kids because we're understanding that they're just short circuited. Their brain has short circuited because of the way that their input is affecting their brain.
Hey, sweet friend, do you have questions about adoption and foster care? This podcast is meant to be a resource for you to help you in this calling, which can be full of so many unknowns. We want to answer your questions, which is why in the show notes you'll find Summer's email, which is summercolbert@gmail.com, where you can submit your questions to Summer and let us know if we can share your questions or story here on the podcast, so other listeners can know that they aren't alone in their wondering and experiences. Again, that email is SOMERCOLBERT@gmail.com, or use the link below. You are not alone in this journey, sweet friend. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Even when our children are challenging and their behavior is unlovable, they're still precious. And so there's this concept, again, through TBRI, of mirroring their preciousness, letting children see how much you love and appreciate them through the way that you look at them and the expressions that are on your face and with your body language. So, for example, we talked about anxiety last week. I mentioned ADHD, etc. These are things that they have. Maybe that is a part of the way that they behave as a result of the way that their brain is interpreting the world, but it's what they have, it's not who they are. I hope that's helpful as you're talking about becoming a student of your child. Resist the temptation to live daily life as a chaos coordinator or a behavior management specialist, and be curious about who your child is. And that has also been a really great mindset shift for me as I'm leaning into what it means to be curious about my child is, okay, take off the hat of this is who I think I am, or the referee with the striped shirt and the whistle, and lean into what's making our kids tick and what's bringing them life. As parents, we always need to be working to identify triggers and be steps ahead of our kids to work to head off situations that might cause dysregulation. We talked about that again in last week's episode. So, asking questions and being curious and observing their behavior and body cues, body language cues. This will help you to ask the following type of questions, like what is their threshold or their window of tolerance in a certain situation? So you can take that into what we're about to experience with the holidays and everything that goes with that, or just daily life in general. Know your child's threshold and window of tolerance so you can anticipate input in the brain causing reactive behaviors. What overstimulates them? This is going to be key as you study your child. You'll be able to, over time, build and anticipate what that is. And then lastly, what calms them. Look at the things that have been effective to calm your child and to bring them back to a place of regulation. We've talked about this a lot too with establishing and developing a teaching of emotional and physical language with your child so that they can actually learn to explain to you what is going on in their bodies when they sense themselves becoming dysregulated or they are dysregulated. We can't help if we don't know. And that's a good way to approach it with your child instead of saying, don't act like that. Why are you acting like that? And it coming across as the shaming behavior and more things that will dysregulate them. If we're asking them and saying, hey, listen, I want to help you, but I can't help what I don't know. So let's talk about when I see you doing this, it seems like this. Help me understand what's going on in your body when you start to behave like this, or when I start to see this happening in your body or in your behavior. And as always, remember to reserve moments of regulation for conversation with your child and work together with them when those moments of dysregulation occur. So we teach before we experience the dysregulation. We pour in so that both of you ultimately are equipped when those moments of dysregulation occur. Always, always, always help them to understand that you are on their team and not working against them, but with them to help them learn, to grow, and to improve their skills to manage any dysregulation that they experience as a result of having that neurodivergent type of brain and experience. Instead of assuming or doing the talking for them, prompt them with statements like, it seems like you may be uncomfortable. Can you help me understand? It seems like you are frustrated right now. Can you help me understand? Leading statements that's not giving the answer for them, but is allowing them to learn how to express what's going on in their bodies. That is becoming a student of your child. Number 3, this was a big one in last week's episode as well. Build your toolbox. It really is simpler than you think. And I'm going to breeze through these just for the sake of time today. I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to last week's episode again. But breathing exercises, that is key to calming dysregulation and an overstimulated brain. The tapping back and forth, alternating sides. Chiropractic care to realign the central nervous system has been a game changer for my daughter. I love doing things like repeat it back to me or sing something to a familiar tune. Saying it out loud or singing it helps the brain to focus and complete a task. And so if you're frustrated with a neurodivergent brain who can't seem to hear anything that you're saying or take instruction or follow through with instruction, give them creative ways that will help it stick in the brain a little bit better so that they can be obedient and please you as they want to and put those things into action. This is a huge one for our kiddos, especially who experience ADHD. Don't exceed 3 tasks at a time when you are giving your children tasks. For the younger ones, stick with 1. Say it, have them repeat it back to you. Maybe do it in a funny voice, maybe do it in a familiar tune of a song that they're on one of their TV shows or their favorite movies. And that is a way for you to be able to get your point across, give direction, and see a result on the other side of that. For our older kids, they can take up to 3, but I would not exceed that for our neurodivergent kiddos. Be playful. Laugh with them every chance you get because this cuts the tension and reminds them that you genuinely enjoy being around them, despite both of you having to work together to translate their experience and the way that their brain is translating that around them. Reading with your child is so, so helpful, especially for a neurodivergent brain, because your voice is soothing to your child and it can do wonders with calming a dysregulated system. One of the things that my daughter loves, and I've shared with you guys before, is what we call heartbeat time. This is a fantastic co regulation tool where your child is able to embrace you if they feel safe to do so, laying their head on your chest and listening for your heartbeat. And you listen together, you breathe together, and you might even tap the beat of the heartbeat together. And that will calm a dysregulated brain tremendously for your neurodivergent kiddos. And lastly, tactile activities. Homemade Play-Doh recipes. You can look them up on Pinterest. They're easy to do. It's a fun connecting activity and it gives them something tactile. When their brains are super busy, that can make their bodies kind of chaotic. And so if you can give them something to be doing, it can help with a lot more behavior regulation. Here's another thing that I thought was really, really interesting. Gardening with your kids. If you can get them outdoors and they're doing tactile, actually, it has been scientifically proven that the microbes in the soil have a central nervous system calming effect and even antidepressant abilities. So cool, again, how God designs this world that we live in. And so, if you can get your kids out playing in the sand and digging in the dirt with you in the warmer weather months, that is a really, really amazing thing that has been so fascinating to learn more about. Another thing that we really loved doing, especially during my homeschool years, was as I read to my kids, I gave them Legos. So instead of sit down and be still and listen to mommy read this story, it's giving them something tactile to do so that their brain is processing the information that you are sharing with them, teaching them, giving them the opportunity to have imaginative play and tactile experience for that neurodivergent brain. It's key. As always, be adding to your toolbox because what works today may not work tomorrow or even later the same day. And so, having these different options of things that you can pull out at any given moment and pray. I ask the Lord all the time in moments of dysregulation, especially when it's extreme quick onset of dysregulation. I pray and ask the Lord, Lord, what do I need to do in this moment? And give yourself grace and don't pressure yourself to learn everything overnight or to know everything overnight. You are going on this journey of trial and error and learning with your child as you go along the way. And our kids teach us as we seek to meet their needs. That goes back to becoming a student. As we are curious, as we seek to learn more about them and how we can best partner with our child to help them thrive, we learn along the way. And ultimately, we know that God uses their challenges and our challenges that we carry alongside them to sanctify and grow us into who He wants us to be, just as much as He is molding our kids into who He wants them to be. And what a privilege it is that we get to be a part of that. Even more comforting than that is that it's not all up to us. The Lord is ever present with us, giving us grace when we fall short because it's going to happen, guys. He gives us direction when we don't know what to do, and He gives unconditional love that we can both receive and model for our kids along the way. So let's just keep building those toolboxes. Number 4, consider where you can give a yes or a choice for neurodivergent kiddos. They tend to need a lot of no's, especially our kiddos with attention and self-control challenges. And so as you're considering that of what hill do I die on, basically, that's a good way to put it. But what are my hard no's and what are some things that I can flex and say yes to? Where can I be flexible with a choice? Now, you're still in your rightful place of authority and as you're offering a choice. And so give examples of options for them. So let's just say it's a power struggle with clothing because there might be some sensory issues related to certain fabrics and how a child interprets that in their body. But you know for sure there's a certain set of type of clothing that is acceptable and it's been agreed upon. So then that's where it's not, okay, you're just going to wear this tomorrow because I said so. It's, okay, would you like to wear the blue one or the red one? Would you like to have your hair in a ponytail or would you like for me to braid it today? Either way, they are, or for example, sometimes for sensory issues with our neurodivergent kiddos, keeping our bodies and our mouths clean can be a real challenge because they don't like the sensory input of what that feels like or this overwhelming sense of soaps and things like that. And so you give them a choice. Would you like to use this toothpaste or this one? Would you like to choose this soap or this one? Would you like to wash your own hair or would you like me to help you with that? It gives them a sense of control when the input from their brain is overwhelming and it might be perceived almost as an attack. That can really help to build connection, meet needs, and make sure that you're accomplishing the daily things that need to happen with cleanliness, with keeping our kids clothed, with keeping them responsible when we're going out in public, those types of things. If you are in a constant state of correction or power struggle with your child, that is going to hinder connection with your child and even lead to blocked care, which we've touched on. And I cannot wait to welcome the author of Blocked Care, Lisa Sequals, for another episode about that coming up at the beginning of next year. Stay tuned for that one. But going back to this, giving a yes or offering a choice makes room for connection with you and your child so that they better respect and receive those hard no's or those boundaries that you have to put into place for their safety and when it's necessary. So consider where you can give a yes or a choice with your neurodivergent kiddos. Last one, and we're going to wrap up today's episode. Number 5, be mindful of what supports the brain and the body and what doesn't. Okay, not a popular opinion here, but Many of our neurodivergent kiddos and their symptoms associated with that diagnosis are actually indicators of food sensitivities and even parasitic infections. Don't freak out. It's not a big deal. We all have parasites. Do your research. Not a big deal. But all of this can be addressed through elimination diets and through supplementations and even detox protocols. All of this can be done under the direction of physicians who are especially skilled and trained in holistic or osteopathic healthcare and medicine. So, if that is something that you would like to dive further into, I would encourage that. That is how our family functions the vast majority of the time. I am so grateful for the balance of Western and holistic medicine, and I embrace both. So I want to say that for the record, and always do that under the direction of a healthcare professional. Let's talk about really quickly about what supports the brain and the body. It's very basic: a safe environment where the central nervous system is regulated, proper nourishment, proper rest, and connection. That is what supports the holistic person as God designed us. It is really challenging in the United States. I'm going to be honest. Our food system, especially in the US, is it's challenging with the ingredients that are in many other countries are outlawed or at least have warning labels on them when it comes to certain ingredients. And our food system, especially the food system designed to target the interest of children, is rarely in the best interest of their brains and bodies, especially our neurodivergent kiddos who tend to be really, really hypersensitive when they take in these types of things. And so, examples of these are processed sugars, artificial dyes, preservatives, just additives to our food in general, all contribute to a short circuiting of the brain's ability to function well. And that's true for us as adults and those who don't fall under this neurodivergent category. It affects our body in really negative ways. Foods that contain heavy metals and, ouch, I'm going to say it, screens and overstimulating shows, video games, and just media in general. So, please try not to get overwhelmed as I'm sharing all of this. Take one thing at a time if you need to and address each one. Any change is progress, and let's celebrate our wins along the way. Okay. Deep breaths. It's okay. Hang in there. Um, Give foods that do support brain health and healthy cognition. This is in the form of healthy omegas, healthy fats, leafy veggies, and colorful fruits with antioxidants, just fruits and vegetables in general, filtered water, preferably not from plastic bottles that can contain microplastics. We have a filter with ours that is an alkaline filter. It's a great way to balance the gut and improve the gut brain connection. That's a whole other thing I could geek out on for days is the gut brain connection and how those two tie together in affecting our body's function and our brain's function. I have become, I think I told you guys this in our last episode, I have become a label nerd and I read labels. And do I say no to every single thing? No, absolutely not. Do my kids still eat certain things? Yes, they do. But read your labels. And a good rule of thumb is the shorter the ingredient list, the better. Another good rule of thumb is if you can't pronounce it, it's processed. And it might fall into that category that's not healthy for the brain. We are so fortunate now that there are so many allergen friendly options available out there. One, just for example, is the Enjoy brand. Yum Earth is another one that has really good treats for kids. It looks like all of the normal candies that they're used to having, but it doesn't contain all of those additives and those food dyes that can aggravate a very hypersensitive brain. So, I know that some of you are probably listening and are like, okay, that's great. That's a really great list. And that's an ideal world. And there is no way that my child will ever eat these. I'm in a power struggle every day outside of mac and cheese and chicken nuggets. I hear you. And there's grace, one thing at a time. Like I said, any progress, any change is progress. And it is amazing, actually, what our kids are willing to try. I have learned if we allow some ownership in the meal. So, some suggestions for that and helping you to introduce some new foods when it comes to introducing things that are healthy for our brains of neurodivergent kiddos is take them shopping with you. Maybe this looks like a fun farmer's market experience in the warmer weather months. Grow a small hobby garden. We have a little strawberry patch in our backyard that is mine and my daughter's favorite thing. We also grow other vegetables and things together. Maybe go to a local farm where you can pick blueberries or strawberries together. So it's a fun connecting activity, but it's also something that will encourage them. Like they've gotten their fingers dirty for the blueberry picking, their fingers are blue, and it's fun to sample them and taste them along the way. And that can introduce a fun experience associated with a new taste, might be less intimidating. And so then that might be helpful for them to start to take in some more of those healthier foods when they have a little bit more ownership and control. Let them help you prepare the meal as it is safe to do so. This is a wonderful, again, connecting activity, but when they have ownership in kneading that bread or stirring that soup or safely being able to cut up those vegetables and add them to the meal, it makes them more inclined to want to at least have a taste and maybe develop a taste for foods that they might not have. And then lastly, just celebrate their willingness to try new things. It is amazing to me when we take the pressure off of our kids and off of ourselves. We build our knowledge with everything that I have learned and have shared with you guys today. It is amazing to me the progress that can be made. And so, that is a basic overview of the top 5 ways that you can begin to understand better and parent your neurodivergent kiddos. As always, if you've got questions or feedback from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Go to that link in the show notes, send me a message, and I would love to hear from you, hear your story, how I can pray for you, and how I can answer questions and continue to serve you well. As always, it is my honor to serve you, and I appreciate so much you listening to today's episode, and I look forward to being back with you next time. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.